Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Diego Mancilla. I'm the director of the Spanish English Translation Certificate Program at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And today I'll speak with Natasha Hakimi, who holds a creative writing MFA from Boston University and both a BA in Spanish and a BA in English with a creative writing concentration from the University of California, Los Angeles. She has received several awards for her work as a journalist, including 3 Southern California Journalism Awards and 2 National Arts and Entertainment Journalism Awards, as well as several other honors for her creative writing. She has worked for a literary journal, Agni, and Los Angeles Magazine, and the Webby Award-winning political journal, Truth Ticket. In 2016, Literal Publishing released bilingual editions of her translations of Alicia Borinsky's My Husband's Woman and Liliana Lutkin's Theater of Operations. So hi, Natasha, and
Hi,
welcome.
Taylor. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a few questions for you. The first one is, could you tell us about your experience in journalism and what is your current role, and when and how did you start?
Great. So I was at UCLA. So this must have been I was about midway through my college career when I decided I was interested in journalism, and I applied for an internship at Los Angeles Magazine, which I was there for about a year. And Los Angeles Magazine was great because I was able to so interns there did a lot of fact checking, which was really a great way to start in journalism because it really kind of reiterates the importance of facts and sources. I was doing a lot of things like calling sources and making sure that whatever the reporter had said was accurate. And then I also got to do some reporting of my own for Los Angeles Magazine for both their blog and their print magazine. And I got to see there firsthand kind of what a magazine newsroom looks like. Since then, the main place I've worked was Truthdig, which is a political journal where I was for 10 years. And I went from being an intern to being an assistant editor to being an associate editor to being a senior editor to being a foreign editor. One of these kind of long trajectories that are kind of rare now, really, to start somewhere and still be there for 10 years. And that was a very different environment. And so, whereas in Los Angeles Magazine, it was a very well-known magazine. There were it was very easy to get interviews. There were a lot of sources. Trustig, it was run by well-known journalists, for example, Robert Shear, who was at the Los Angeles Times for 30 years, and Chris Hedges, who was at the New York Times for also 30 years. Was a much smaller website. And so during the time that I've been there, there have been, on staff, just a few editors at a time, maybe 3 to 5 has been kind of the maximum. And but we've had a lot of contributors from all over the world. We have had writers from as far as Pakistan, Mexico, Argentina, and especially in a section we had called Global Voices, which was specifically about women in different parts of the world. And so that's where I was, where I've been foreign editor, and I've also done some writing here and there for different websites.
Great, thank you. A lot of experience in that field. So the next question is, based on your experience, could you talk a little bit about translation within the media industry, and what is the role of a translator in that field?
Yeah, so this is such a great question, and I didn't want to be the only source because my experience is so specifically, in one website mainly, even though I was at Los Angeles Magazine for a year. Los Angeles Magazine didn't have any staff translators. and neither did Trustig, aside from me, where so I would translate articles from time to time. Certainly, I was able, as someone who's bilingual, trilingual now, I was able to use a lot of sources in different languages and translate them myself, as well as translate interviews and run interviews in Spanish and in Portuguese. And so I actually asked Robert Shear, my editor-in-chief, who was at the Los Angeles Times, about what it was like at the LA Times and if they had translators. And the same, my colleague Jake Sugarman, who was at Salon and Alternate before he was at Trustig. And unfortunately, they both said that even though these were bigger publications, they didn't have staff translators. And so a lot of the way that translation in media works is that if you're a writer and you're working on a piece and you know that you don't know the source language, you will either hire a translator or a service. And sometimes publications, bigger publications like Los Angeles Times, for example, will have sort of a list of translators that they go to, or translation companies that they go to, or interpreters that they have in different countries. For example, if you're being sent somewhere to do something. And so to me, it's actually really a shame. I think that it's, especially somewhere, for example, like Los Angeles, it would be really great to have a full-time Spanish translator where Spanish is so widely spoken. And certainly in my experience, being able to speak different languages and translate has allowed me to access sources that I wouldn't have otherwise. But that's not the case for many reporters.
And what are the responsibilities, opportunities, challenges that a bilingual journalist faces today?
It's interesting. I think one of the things that's a little bit tough about being a bilingual journalist is that there are times when you're the only one who knows the source language. And so let's say I turn in a piece to an editor at a publication, and I've used either newspapers that are in Spanish or Portuguese, or I've interviewed people in Spanish or Portuguese, and then I'm asking a copywriter, a copy editor and a line editor to review the piece. They'll often come up against this problem of not knowing the language that of the original source. And at those times, sometimes I'll have to kind of direct them towards translations that I've done, but then again, I'm still the source. And so that's kind of the biggest difficulty I think that you face as a bilingual journalist. But I think, to be honest, I think that it's been so much more of an asset than anything. I think the ability to be able to speak to different people in different languages and to be able to translate, like I said, source text, really makes for a much more international scope and a much more well-rounded scope. But even within local communities, like I was saying, like in Los Angeles, where people speak Spanish regularly, it's been really great. And actually, so one of the funniest times that I've been able to use Spanish, I've used it a lot throughout my career, but was when the Real Madrid soccer team was playing training and playing in Los Angeles. And so I got to go and watch them train and ask them questions and interview all these famous soccer players because I spoke Spanish and none of my colleagues did.
Okay. So, so do you participate now in media translation or in any bilingual media content production?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sort of the most recent two things that kind of pop into my mind that I did that have to do with media translation. One was I did a Q&A with the author, the Argentinian author, Samantha Schweblin, who had a new book of short stories now. I think it's called Mouthful of Birds, but her most famous book is, I've just forgotten how it was translated into English, Distancia Rescate. Do you remember, Diego?
I don't remember the translation. No.
Anyway, it's a great book. I'll look it up a bit later. But So Samantha Schweblin, she speaks English, but she preferred to have an interview in Spanish since it's the language that she works in, writes in. It's her native language. And so we had the entire interview in Spanish, and then I was able to then also translate the transcription, transcribe it and then translate it. And so that's something that we wouldn't have been able to really publish it if I didn't speak Spanish and wasn't able to translate the Spanish. And then the other example, I just not long ago did a piece about the Latinx community and during this election, how they were interested. There were many, especially young Latinx voters, that were very interested in Bernie Sanders. And so I was able to get in touch with different organizations that are linked to the Latinx community in the US. And sometimes they spoke Spanish, or whatever contact I was speaking to spoke Spanish. And so that was, again, recording an interview, transcribing it in Spanish, and then also then translating it into English so that I could write about it in English.
So finally, what would you recommend to anyone who would like to start working in the field of media translation, or simply apply their bilingual skills in the field of media in general?
Yeah, I mean, journalism is kind of a funny space because it's gone through so many transformations in the past few decades, especially since it moved online. And so my biggest recommendation really is to try, well, I kind of did the traditional start an internship, try to get published at the place that you're doing an internship in. That's not always possible just because, internships are limited, they depend on where you live. But I still recommend that. That's such a great way to kind of be around other writers and see what it's like to be in an office space where this happens. But the other thing is, once you have some experience or you have some bylines in different publications, the best thing you can do is really start to find the publications that you like and that you read and that kind of you could see yourself reflected in, and then send them a pitch about something. It could be anything, even people who maybe are changing from, let's say, the field of health and want to write about it, or they want to do some sort of interview in another language, and then they want to translate it and have it published somewhere. That's really the best way to do it, is to really write a short summary, a short pitch, and email the editors who are always looking for new material, especially online. There's so much, you're constantly putting out content, and so they're definitely looking for new voices.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's been very, very helpful for all of our listeners. I congratulate you on all the work that you've done and you continue doing. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Diego. I'm glad it was helpful. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.